Emily Carson, a meticulous night shift nurse, spots a dangerous medication error for John Decker, a seemingly frail veteran. Her quiet intervention saves his life, unbeknownst to her colleagues who mock her diligence. The next day, Delta Force operators arrive, revealing Decker as a legendary commander. They honor Emily with a rare challenge coined for her vigilance. Despite workplace backlash, her actions spark a hospital-wide safety protocol. A mysterious note in a later incident with another soldier hint at her growing reputation among elite forces. Who else watches Emily, and what other lives will her quiet courage save? Love stories of unsung heroes like Emily? Subscribe to our channel. Your support amplifies quiet courage, giving a voice to those who save lives in the shadows. Join us to uncover more tales of silent bravery. Hit subscribe and share to make their stories resonate. Thank you. In the quiet embrace of the night shift at St. Clair Memorial Hospital in Colorado Springs, Emily Carson found her rhythm. At 34, she wasn't the youngest nurse on the floor, nor did she chase the camaraderie that others seemed to thrive on. Her colleagues dubbed her the Ghost for her ability to move through the wards with silent precision, materializing at a patient's bedside exactly when needed, then fading back into her work without a trace of ego. Small talk wasn't her forte, but her clinical accuracy and relentless focus on her patients were unmatched. Charts don't lie, she'd say with a faint, knowing smile. But people, they've got a knack for bending the truth. For Emily, the hospital's hushed nights were a refuge, a place where she could pour her heart into the work that defined her, caring for those who needed it most. That night unfolded like countless others. Emily scanned the admissions roster as she navigated the dimly lit corridor, her sneakers whispering against the polished linoleum. 3 new patients, 1 transfer from the emergency room. Her eyes paused on the details of John D., a 76-year-old Air Force veteran admitted for pneumonia and dehydration, his chart noting PTSD and early-stage dementia. Room 412 held 4 beds, each cradling a life marked by pain or fragility, but it was the man in the far corner who drew her in. His weathered hands trembled faintly against the stark white sheets, and his eyes were locked on the ceiling, as if chasing memories that flickered just out of reach. "Good evening, Mr. D," Emily said, her voice warm and steady as she set her medication tray down. "I'm Emily, your nurse tonight." His gaze shifted to her, sharp and piercing, a quiet intensity that seemed to defy the confused label stamped in his chart. A younger nurse, trailing behind Emily, muttered with a roll of her eyes, "Don't bother with the pleasantries. Chart says he's half gone most of the time." Emily's attention lingered on the man's trembling fingers, then drifted to the faded tattoo peeking from beneath his hospital gown, a pair of wings etched across his forearm, weathered but defiant. Something in his eyes, a flicker of resilience, stirred her heart. It clashed with the younger nurse's careless dismissal, and Emily felt a quiet resolve settle in. "I've got this," she said, her tone gentle but firm, signaling her colleague to leave. The younger nurse shrugged, tossing a medication cup onto the tray before heading out. "These old vets just clog up beds forever," she grumbled, her voice fading down the hall. "Just leave the meds. He won't know the difference." Alone with John, Emily's focus sharpened. She reviewed the medication list, cross-referencing it with his electronic chart. Her breath caught when she spotted a potential disaster. The new antibiotic, combined with his heart medication, could trigger a catastrophic interaction, possibly a microstroke or worse. Her heart raced, not with fear, but with the clarity of purpose that defined her best moments. She called the on-duty doctor, her voice calm as she laid out the concern, securing approval for an adjusted dosage in a matter of minutes. Back at John's bedside, Emily measured the corrected medication with the precision of a craftsman. "Sir," she said, her voice soft but grounding, "I'm going to help you take these. The doctor made a small tweak to keep you safe." She supported his head with care, guiding each pill to his lips, watching to ensure he swallowed without struggle. When a stray drop of water trailed down his chin, she wiped it away with a tenderness that felt second nature. Suddenly, his hand shot out, gripping her wrist with a strength that startled her. "You saved my legs again," he whispered, his voice clear and haunting, slicing through the haze of his supposed confusion. Emily's heart stumbled, her mind grappling with the weight of his words. Was it dementia blending past and present, or something more? She didn't push for answers, sensing the fragility of the moment. Instead, she offered a gentle smile. "Just doing my job, sir," she said, smoothing in his blanket with care before stepping away. During the shift handover, the charge nurse skimmed Emily's meticulous notes with a skeptical arched brow. "Playing doctor again, Carson?" she teased, her tone sharp with condescension. "Questioning prescriptions isn't really your lane." Emily's jaw tightened, but she swallowed her retort. The chart told the truth, and she'd done what was right. That was enough. She finished her documentation and slipped out, the weight of the night lingering in her chest as she drove home. The next morning, Emily's phone jolted her from the quiet of her post-shower routine, her hair still dripping onto her bathrobe. "Miss Carson, this is Angela from HR," came the clipped voice. "We need you in administration before your shift tonight." A knot formed in Emily's stomach. The hospital's administrative wing, the sterile wing, with its sterile polish and framed mission statements, always felt like a foreign territory, more hostile than the most chaotic, infectious disease ward. At 6 p.m., dressed in crisp scrubs, she sat across from Nursing Director Matthews and Risk Management Coordinator Phillips. An incident report lay between them, its presence as heavy as a gavel. "A patient in room 412 filed a complaint," Matthews said, his eyes glued to the document. "Claims you deviated from prescribed treatment protocols without authorization." Emily sat taller, her voice steady despite the churn in her gut. "I contacted Dr. Reynolds about a potential drug interaction. He approved the change. It's all documented." Phillips leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "The issue isn't whether you were right, Miss Carson. It's about following protocol." As the meeting stretched on, Emily's thoughts drifted to John D. His trembling hands, his whispered gratitude echoing in her mind. She couldn't shake the feeling that his words carried a significance she hadn't yet grasped. Unknown to her, the hospital's 4th floor had been transformed that morning. Delta Force operators, their presence as silent as it was commanding, had secured the ward. They stood at attention outside room 412, their eyes tracking the unassuming nurse, whose quiet act of vigilance had rippled far beyond the hospital's walls. Outside, the world buzzed with whispers. Who was the man she'd saved? And why had her simple, unseen act drawn America's most elite soldiers to her hallway? Emily's heart pounded in her chest, a steady drumbeat that threatened to drown out the hum of the hospital around her. She stood in the sterile corridor of St. Clair Memorial, her nurse's badge clipped to her scrubs, her hands steady despite the storm brewing inside. The words from Dr. Matthews still echoed in her mind, sharp and cutting. "Unnecessary alarm. You're a nurse, not a pharmacologist." His reprimand had been delivered with the kind of dismissive authority that made her want to scream. But she'd bitten her tongue, her jaw tight as she swallowed her pride. She'd adjusted a patient's medication tray, a small act driven by years of instinct and training, because she'd seen the potential for a dangerous drug interaction. It wasn't reckless. It was right. But to Matthews, it was overstepping, a breach of protocol that landed a formal note in her file, exceeded nursing authority, counseled on proper procedural compliance. The words burned, not because they were unfair, but because they reduced her 15 years of quiet competence to a single, sterile sentence. As she moved through the hospital cafeteria later that day, the weight of the reprimand clung to her like damp clothes. The chatter of the day shift nurses, usually a comforting background hum, felt like a spotlight on her discomfort. She caught snippets of their conversation as she passed their table, their laughter slicing through her. "Did you see this?" one nurse said, her voice bright with amusement as she held up her phone. On the screen was a photo of the medication tray Emily had adjusted, posted on the staff forum with a mocking caption, "Styly, saving the world one pill at a time. Hero complex." The words hit like a slap, and Emily's cheeks flushed hot with embarrassment. She kept her head down, her steps quickening as she pushed past the table. But the sting lingered. She'd never chased popularity. She'd built her career on precision, on doing the job well, on being the nurse patients could rely on when the world felt like it was falling apart. But now her colleagues' laughter made her feel small, exposed, like a child caught playing dress-up in a grown-up's world. That evening, as she stepped into room 412, Emily's nerves were still raw, her confidence shaken. The elderly veteran in the bed, John Decker, sat upright, his eyes brighter than they'd been the night before. The change in him was striking. His color was better, his breathing steadier, a stark contrast to the frail figure she'd tended to during her last shift. "Evening, Mr. D," she said, her voice professional but warm as she checked his chart and vitals. "John," he corrected, his voice carrying a strength that hadn't been there before. "John Decker." She offered a small smile, her hands moving efficiently through her tasks, but she felt the weight of another pair of eyes on her, the roommate, a man whose pinched expression suggested he was the one who'd complained about her overreach to Matthews. She said little, her focus on her work, but as she turned to leave, John's voice stopped her. "They giving you trouble, nurse?" His tone was gentle but probing, and his sharp blue eyes, framed by bushy white brows, seemed to see right through her carefully composed exterior. Emily hesitated, her hand on the doorframe. "Nothing I can't handle," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. John's gaze held hers, unyielding but kind. "Some people don't recognize lifesavers until they're drowning themselves," he said, his words simple but heavy with meaning. They followed her as she moved through the rest of her shift, a quiet anchor amidst the chaos of new admissions and routine checks. By midnight, the sting of the day's events began to fade, buried under the weight of her responsibilities. She focused on her patients, one chart at a time, pushing aside thoughts of administrative warnings and mocking captions. Her work was her refuge, a place where competence could still outweigh criticism. At 3 a.m., Emily took her break on the hospital's rear patio, the cold Colorado air biting at her skin as she stared at the jagged silhouette of the mountains against the star-strewn sky. The vastness of it all made her feel small but grounded, as if the world beyond the hospital could absorb her doubts. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. A text from the security desk. "Your car alarm is going off in the staff lot." Frowning, she hurried across the hospital grounds, her sneakers crunching on the gravel. When she reached her 10-year-old Honda, it sat silent. No alarm, no sign of disturbance. But tucked beneath the windshield wiper was a cream-colored envelope, its edges crisp against the worn paint of her car. She glanced around the empty parking lot, her pulse quickening as she opened it. Inside was a note, printed on heavy paper. "You did the right thing. We know what that means. Stay steady. D." In the bottom right corner, there was a small emblem, a winged dagger with a banner, the insignia of the U.S. Army's Delta Force. Emily's breath caught. She read the note twice, her eyes darting to the darkened hospital windows, a prickle of unease crawling up her spine. Who had left this? And how did they know about a routine medication adjustment on a night shift? Tucking the note into her pocket, she returned to her duties, a strange mix of apprehension and anticipation building with each passing hour. The next evening, Emily arrived at Clair Memorial to find the hospital buzzing with an unfamiliar energy. Nurses clustered at the station, their whispers sharp with curiosity. Security guards stood taller, their eyes scanning the halls with unusual intensity. Even Dr. Reynolds, who was usually glued to his tablet, kept glancing toward the elevators, his brow furrowed. "What's happening?" Emily asked, stowing her bag in the break room locker. Lisa, a pediatric nurse with a knack for picking up gossip, shrugged. "No idea, but there's some kind of military presence. Security's been checking IDs twice at every entrance." Emily's stomach tightened, the note from the night before suddenly heavy in her mind. At 7:15 p.m., the unmistakable thump of helicopter blades echoed above the hospital. Most of the staff barely noticed. Emergency transports to the rooftop helipad were routine. But Emily felt a shift in the air, like the pressure dropping before a storm. She was checking a patient's IV when it happened, a subtle change in the atmosphere that made her pause. Looking up, she saw them. 6 men in black tactical uniforms, moving with quiet precision down the corridor. No insignia, no name tags, just the unmistakable posture of military discipline, their eyes scanning the hospital with measured intensity. Dr. Phillips, ever the nervous administrator, approached them, his voice shaky. "Excuse me, are you Secret Service? We weren't notified about any VIP patients." The tallest man, his silver beard closely cropped, responded in a low, calm voice. "No, sir, we're just here to thank a nurse." As if on cue, all 6 men turned toward Emily, their movements synchronized, deliberate. Her heart stuttered, the blood draining from her face as they approached, stopping 3 feet away. The bearded man stepped forward, his gaze steady but not unkind. "Emily Carson?" he asked. She nodded, her throat tight, acutely aware of every eye in the corridor now fixed on her. The weight of their attention was overwhelming, a mix of curiosity and judgment from her colleagues. But the men in front of her carried a different kind of presence, one that demanded respect without demanding fear. Her mind raced, piecing together the note, John Decker's words, the emblem. What had she stumbled into? And why did it feel like the hospital, her sanctuary of routine and predictability, was suddenly a stage for something far bigger than her? If you've ever done what's right, even when it cost you, leave a 2 below. Every gaze in the hospital corridor fixed on them, a silent weight that seemed to press against Emily Carson's chest. The man before her, clad in a crisp suit that did little to hide his military bearing, extended a calloused hand. "Master Sergeant Daniels, 1st Special Forces, Operational Detachment Delta," he said, his voice low but carrying an unmistakable authority. "Colonel Decker requests your presence." Emily's pulse quickened, her mind racing with questions she didn't dare voice. She followed Daniels and his 2 colleagues, their boots echoing with purpose down the sterile hallway toward room 412. Outside the door, 2 more operators stood sentinel, their eyes scanning the corridor with a vigilance that made her feel both safe and exposed. The room itself was transformed, cleared of other patients, the air heavy with a sense of something momentous. Inside, Colonel John Decker sat propped up in his hospital bed, his gaunt frame a stark contrast to the commanding fire in his pale blue eyes. A wooden box rested on his lap, its polished surface catching the dim light. Emily's breath caught as she met his gaze, sensing the weight of a life lived on the edge of danger. "Nurse Carson," he said, his voice surprisingly robust, carrying a warmth that hadn't been there during her prior checks. "It appears I owe you some explanations." His words hung in the air, and Emily felt a shiver of anticipation, her heart pounding with the realization that this was no ordinary patient. Master Sergeant Daniels stepped forward, his presence grounding the moment. "Colonel Jonathan Decker," he began, "served as the commanding officer of Delta Force training operations from 1981 to 93. He handpicked and trained over 200 operators, men who went on to serve in Panama, Grenada, and the Gulf War." Emily's mind spun, piecing together fragments of the past few days. The elderly veteran she'd known as confused and frail was in fact a legend among America's most elite warriors. Her thoughts flickered to the medication error she'd caught, a seemingly small oversight that now felt like a seismic shift in her understanding of her role. Colonel Decker's voice drew her back. "That mistake with my meds," he said, his tone grave, "wasn't just a slip-up. The combination would have triggered a cardiovascular event within half an hour. Given my condition," he gestured to his legs, one missing below the knee, the other scarred and frail, "it would have been fatal." His eyes softened, but his words carried a steely edge. "Lost this leg in Lebanon, 83. Nearly lost the other in Afghanistan, 2002, after a stroke much like the one you stopped." Emily's throat tightened, her hands trembling at her sides as she absorbed the gravity of his words. She'd seen the charts, checked the doses, but now she saw the man, a warrior who'd faced death countless times, only to be nearly undone by a hospital's error. Daniel spoke again, his voice steady. "When the colonel alerted us to the incident, we had our medical team analyze the medication combo. You were spot on, Nurse Carson. Most would have overlooked it." Emily's cheeks flushed, a mix of pride and disbelief swirling within her. She'd acted on instinct, driven by a nagging sense that something was off, but to hear it validated by men like these felt surreal. Decker's hands moved to the wooden box, his fingers tracing its edges with reverence. He lifted the lid, revealing a heavy challenge coin, its surface embossed with the Delta Force insignia, glinting like a talisman. "This," he said, his voice thick with meaning, "is awarded only to those who've saved the life of a Delta operator. Fewer than 50 exist." He leaned forward, placing the coin in Emily's trembling palm, its weight grounding her in the moment. "You didn't just fix a prescription, Miss Carson. You saw what others missed. That's what we spend years training our people to do." Tears pricked at her eyes, but she blinked them back, clutching the coin as if it might anchor her against the tide of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. The door swung open and Nursing Director Matthews stormed in, her face a mask of irritation that quickly morphed into confusion, then shock as she registered the military presence. "What's going on here?" she demanded, her voice sharp. Colonel Decker turned his gaze on her, a look that could have silenced a battlefield. "I'm honoring the nurse who saved my life after your hospital nearly took it," he said, each word deliberate, cutting through the air like a blade. Matthew's mouth opened, then closed, her authority crumbling under the weight of his stare. Emily stood frozen, her heart pounding, acutely aware of the coin's weight in her hand and the unspoken power in the room. By evening, the hospital was abuzz with activity. News vans clustered outside, their lights casting erratic shadows across the parking lot. Social media erupted with headlines. Night nurse saves Delta Force legend. Elite unit honors her. The staff forum post that had mocked Emily's diligence vanished without a trace. The complaint filed against her was quietly withdrawn. Director Matthews sent a hospital-wide email praising Emily's exceptional clinical acumen. But Emily saw none of it. She moved through her shift with the same quiet focus, checking charts, soothing patients, the coin a steady presence in her pocket. Its weight wasn't a boast, but a reminder that doing what was right needed no fanfare. It was its own quiet triumph. A week later, St. Clair Memorial's auditorium brimmed with staff, administrators, and a row of stoic men in civilian clothes who stood along the back wall, their eyes watchful. The hospital CEO unveiled the Carson protocol, a new patient safety initiative mandating double verification of medication interactions for all admissions. Emily sat in the last row, her discomfort palpable as applause filled the room. She declined every request to speak, her thoughts drifting to the patients waiting for her care. After the ceremony, she made her way back to room 412, where Colonel Decker was preparing for discharge, his belongings packed in a worn duffel bag. "I hear you're dodging interviews," he said, a faint smile playing on his lips as she checked his vitals one last time. Emily shrugged, her voice soft but resolute. "Nothing to say that needs saying." Decker's smile deepened, a nod of approval. "Humility," he said, "the virtue of the quiet professionals." He handed her an envelope. "Freeman, wrote this last night. Read it when you're ready." That evening, alone in her small apartment, Emily opened the letter, her fingers tracing the 3 pages of Decker's steady script. The final paragraph seized her heart. "We train our lives to see threats no one else does. You saw one too, and you didn't look away. In my world, that's the line between coming home and not. Thank you for bringing me home one last time." Tears fell, silent and unhurried, as she folded the letter, the coin's weight in her pocket, a quiet echo of the bond they'd forged. Life settled back into its rhythm. Emily returned to her night shifts, preferring the hush of the hospital's quiet hours when she could focus on patients without the clamor of bureaucracy or praise. The coin stayed with her, not as a badge, but as a talisman, a reminder that attention to detail wasn't just about procedure, it was about seeing the person beneath the chart, the life behind the diagnosis. 3 months later, a new patient arrived, a young soldier with combat injuries from overseas, his medical record strangely incomplete. Emily went through her checks with the same meticulous care, her instincts flaring when she spotted a potential reaction with his unmarked medications. She alerted the doctor without hesitation, her voice calm but insistent. The next day, a plain envelope appeared on her windshield, tucked under the wiper. Inside was a simple note card with a single typed line. "They told us to look for the nurse with the quiet strength. Now we know why." No signature, no explanation, just a quiet acknowledgement from those who understood. Emily never displayed her coin or framed the letters. She didn't need to. She simply continued her work, another guardian in the night, protecting those who protected others. Some wielded weapons to save lives. She did it with steady hands, watchful eyes, and a silent courage that needed no applause. In a world that exalts the loudest voices, Emily stood on the front line between life and negligence. Her quiet insistence on getting things right, a testament to the power of those who refuse to look away. Her shifts remained her sanctuary, her vigilance, a whisper in the dark, proving that the most vital work often unfolds in the spaces where no one else is watching.